Hey everyone, I'm Carolyn. Welcome back to another episode of As I See It. Let's talk about gas prices. They're pretty insane. I went out today in my RV and I was shocked. I haven't been parked very long and they've gone up a lot. $4.49 a gallon. The national average is $4.17. So let's talk a little bit about gas prices and why they're so high. Because there's a lot of misinformation, there's a lot of blaming going on. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about how gas prices are set and why they're so high. First of all, inflation. We have seen a lot of inflation over the last 6 months or maybe a year. And inflation generally is when you start seeing prices of everything go up. In economics terms, when you talk about the economy and macroeconomics, inflation is when there's too much money chasing too few goods. So you got a lot of money, but you don't have enough goods to supply the demand that all that money is making. So that means there's a scarcity of whatever products it is. In this case, it's gas, and it's been food, and it's been beef, and it's been furniture. So we've had a lot of money, which is a good thing. In a way, inflation really isn't a bad thing. That means there's a lot of money. People are working, people are earning, but for whatever reason, production isn't keeping up. So there's too much money chasing too few goods. And part of the reason we've had this inflation is because the pandemic over the last couple of years, production has been limited or shut down. People haven't been working. And then we saw the supply chain issue, and that was partly also because of the pandemic. And now we're seeing the gas prices go skyrocket. And there are many reasons for that. Number one, production was cut back because there wasn't as much use, right? People weren't driving because of the pandemic. People weren't going out. So the opposite of inflation is deflation. What happened is you have too many goods and not enough money, so goods become cheaper, and the gas companies didn't want to keep producing gas at the cheaper rate, or they weren't very happy about that. They were, of course, but they were getting lower prices. So that's the opposite of inflation. Again, inflation is too much money chasing too few goods. The opposite of that is too many goods and too little money, so the market gets flooded and prices go down. Now what we're seeing, in addition to all of the challenges put on the supply chain because of the pandemic, now of course we have what's going on in Ukraine. We have the war it's not even a war. I don't even want to say it's a war between Russia and Ukraine, because it's not. To say that it's a war between Russia and Ukraine is like blaming the victim for being bullied by the bully, right? Or the assaulter, right? Blaming the victim for being assaulted by the assaulter. It's not a war. It's a power grab. I don't know what you would call it. It's a bully. Just being a bully is what it is. So, but because of what Russia is doing, because they invaded Ukraine, Biden just today announced that he's cutting off all oil from Russia. No more oil from Russia. So we have a lot of the big oil producing nations, and we get oil and gas from all over the world, depending on supply and demand. The thing about the supply and demand here is the oil companies kind of get to set the supply. They get to decide how much they want to produce. So in a way, they get to set the prices, or they get to inflate the prices. And that's exactly what has been happening. Gas prices were at I don't remember, 7-year high, I think it might have been. Guess what else was at an all-time high? Profits. Profits for the oil and gas companies, and profits for the CEOs and the shareholders. So while supply and demand is the true theory of economics and how prices are set, of course, when you have collusion and when you have only a few players in a market, then there can be collusion and prices can be set. That's not supposed to happen. We're supposed to have antitrust. We're seeing the exact same thing happen now. Oil companies in the United States, onshore oil companies here, can expand production to bring prices down. So they expand production, they put more oil on the market, bringing prices down. They aren't doing it. They refuse to do it. And people are blaming Biden for this. Again, the oil companies and their executives had record profits last year while we were paying record high prices. And to put things in perspective a little bit, I was just watching a press conference by Joe Biden today announcing that he was cutting off all oil from Russia. Just for some perspective here, a lot of people are blaming Biden, saying, yeah, Biden is restricting them. He's not giving them permits. He's telling them they can't drill anymore because he's all about that clean energy crap. That's not true. The fact is, 90% of the land that oil companies drill on is not federally owned. It's not federal property, 90%. And 10%, the other 10% that is federally owned, there are millions of acres and over 9,000 permits that have already been approved that the gas companies aren't using. They're letting millions of acres of oil land and 9,000 approved permits just sit there. They could be drilling. They could be increasing supply to bring the price down, and they're choosing not to. Everything in our society always seems to come back to the big businesses having too much power. And this is another case. So what is Biden supposed to do? Of course, some Republicans, pundits, certain fake news channels are saying that Biden is restricting production. That's not true. And in fact, last year, the oil and gas companies got really, really mad at Biden because he refused to allow them to drill on more public land, to give them permits on more public land, but they already have millions of acres that they're not using. So why would he give them permits for more public land when they're not using what they have? And what is the president supposed to do? For the Republicans who supposedly are anti-big government and pro-free market, do you want the president to make them, to force them to produce more oil? You kind of can't have it both ways. You either have a free market economy and you let the companies do whatever they want to do and hike up the prices and stop bitching about the price of gas at the pump. Or you say, yeah, okay, you know what, this is a national emergency. The president needs to step in and somehow force them by maybe sanctions, right? Or taking away tax incentives. There are ways that the federal government probably could force the oil companies to produce more. But do we really want to go there? There's also the whole question about, well, how much money do these oil and gas companies contribute to our politicians, and maybe that's why. So it's a loaded subject. There's a lot there. But I just wanted to make the point that this is not Biden's fault. This is the big, rich oil and gas companies purposely gouging us because they can, while they're getting rich. Millions of dollars in bonuses to each of the big, Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, each of the big executives last year, while we were paying more for gas and maybe taking food out of our kids' stomachs and whatever else. Think about that. One other point I wanted to make is that Joe Biden has already released millions of barrels and millions of barrels of oil and gas from our strategic reserves to put into the market to try to help bring prices down. He's trying to increase supply with what he has on hand that he can control in order to bring prices down for the American people. All the while, the oil and gas companies are still limiting their supply and lining their pockets. So something has to be done here. Maybe we do ask the president to force them to produce more, since we're not getting as much oil from international sources since we've cut off Russia. So that's the other thing. You have international sources giving us oil, which gives a little bit more maybe of an incentive for American oil producing companies to keep their prices lower, because there is some competition there. And now we've taken away that competition. So, I mean, that's one less source that we're getting oil from. That's less competition, really, for homegrown, for American oil producers, which means they have more leverage, they have more power to raise prices without raising production if they want to. One other point that I wanted to make, in addition to Joe Biden releasing millions of barrels of oil and gas into the supply chain to bring our prices down, he is also, last year he said under his administration, more oil and gas was produced under his administration than under the former guy's administration the first year. So this lie that he is restricting gas and oil production at our expense at the gas pump, and that all this inflation and all these hikes in gas prices are his fault because he's limiting production, just flatly aren't true. So in addition to having high levels of production last year that were higher than the former guy's first year, this next year we are set to have a record-breaking year in oil and gas production under Joe Biden. So while green energy is a goal, the reality is, and I do believe that our president is a realist and understands that we have to deal with with what we have now. We need gas, we need oil, that our economy, our country runs on it. And he also knows that the American people need to not spend their whole paycheck to fill up their gas tank. So I believe he's doing everything he can by releasing strategic reserves and doing whatever he can to work with the oil companies to increase production. So that's it. That's what I wanted to talk about today. What are your thoughts? Leave your thoughts below. What do you think Joe Biden should do? Should he put sanctions, take away tax incentives or whatever on the oil companies to make them produce more? Is that the role we want the government to have, to force companies to do what's right for the American people and the public good? Leave your comments below, and I'll see you again soon. Thank you so much for being here. Be sure to subscribe below and share and give me a thumbs up. I'll see you soon. Bye.